Okay, great. Well, I guess we'll start introducing ourselves. So my name is Lily Parrott. I'm one of the co-directors of Migration Collective and the London Migration Film Festival. Migration Collective, as I'm sure you all know, is the organization behind the film festival. And our aim is to challenge the rhetoric on migration through art, academia, and action.
And my name is Laura Stanke. I'm one of the co-directors of Migration Collective and London Migration Film Festival. The festival is going on now for 4 years. We are going to have our 5th edition, hopefully soon. And usually we are just based in London, but now because of the whole lockdown situation, we decided to bring the festival online so that people around the world can enjoy and engage with films focusing on migration issues. And we would really like to say a big thank you to all the directors that are here today and that decided to donate us the films, well, donate us, to let us feature their films for this program, which are here now. So maybe you guys want to quickly introduce yourselves and say what film you worked on?
Any of you can go first.
Hey, I'm Azim Bhatti, and I co-wrote and co-directed a short film called Our Kind of Love with LMFF, and yeah, it's I guess a quick log line. It's about a character called Samira, an Afghan village girl who's on a first date in London with Haroon, second generation Londoner, and yeah, just really happy and fortunate to have it featured again in the London Migration Collective. Thank you.
Thanks. Cecilia.
Hi, I'm Cecilia Gragnani. I am actually a performer and writer, but I also produce, and I produced a comedy called Article 50, which was our way of playing with what would happen to mixed couples after Brexit, and it's our own idea of what things would happen if you weren't British, and through the lens of comedy, because that's what I mainly do. And yes, I'd love to chat about migration also in terms of European migrants and economic migrants, as they are called today.
Vahid?
Hello, I'm Vahid Kashavas. I'm making short films. The one I have in Migration Film Festival is called Postman. It's a short documentary about Iranian poet who left Iran a few years ago and now lives in the UK. He's trying to keep writing poetry, and on the other side, he also works as a postman for real men. So I documented his life, and I'm so happy to talk more about it today.
Fantastic. And David?
Hi, my name's David Fideli. I'm in Australia at the moment. I co-directed a film with Kumut Imesh, who I was hoping could join us today, but I made an error with the time difference. I apologize for that. So Kumut is a refugee from the Ivory Coast in West Africa. At that time, an idea of making a film together that would tell his story through his eyes and his words, his perspective. And so we then joined together 4 years later, once he'd actually arrived into France again as a refugee. And we made a film where he returned back to West Africa to retrace his original journey that he was forced to make when he left his country. So it's a true collaboration between Kumut and myself. And again, I'm sorry that he's not here to participate.
Okay, well, thank you so much. So we'll go, right into the questions. And I guess this is just an open question for everyone. It would be great to get your thoughts, So I guess firstly, why did you make a film about migration? Like, why is this what you chose to address?
Yeah, I think to kind of start off, I mean, I guess I always sort of wanted to make a short film and you know, try to kind of write things before about various subject matters, but nothing was really connecting. And then I guess it was about sort of looking, you know, deeper at home. And so Alham, my collaborative partner, he's originally from Afghanistan. My parents are from Pakistan, and so, but like we're both Londoners, so we've both always been in sort of both foots in both of those different worlds, you know, both East and the West. And we thought, you know, why don't we try and do something with this? And then we just came upon the idea of quite literally having, you know, two people from different worlds who share similar backgrounds. They're, I guess, Afghan heritage, but they are from different worlds. And we thought it would be interesting to sort of put them in a room together and kind of see what the results are. So I guess the film sort of explored all different things, you know, migration, you know, marriage and love, and you know, and all of that. And so I think for me, and I think for both of us, it wasn't really a conscious thing to say, you know what, we want to do something about migration, you know, all that sort of stuff. But I guess the beauty of it is the more specific you are, sometimes the more universal it becomes. And yeah, just so many people I know who've seen the film who aren't immigrants, and English is their only speaking language, you know, they can identify with the film, you know, which has been beautiful. And you know, a few people have never really seen a story about someone from Afghanistan before, so that's kind of a double winner. So I guess for us, it was never about being specific and conscious about making an immigrant story, but at the same time, you know, where we want to make stories and show characters that don't necessarily always grace our screens. Yeah, really glad we're able to do that.
Great. Cecilia, your perspective is very different. Why did you decide?
Yeah, I mean, I am a migrant myself because I'm an Italian in the UK. I've been here for more than 10 years. And when Brexit happened, I felt really affected. I thought my life was going to change. I come from a generation that believed that Europe could be a space where we could freely move and realize ourselves and, you know, and build a life in. And so when Brexit happened, with Paul Davidson, who's a writer I work with quite often, we said, let's share a story. Comedy is our medium. And I'm actually surprised by the very little number of stories related to a lot of Europeans and what's going to happen to them with Brexit since Brexit happened. So 2016, I thought what I've always loved about the UK is the ability to tell stories about the world as we live it, and as things happen. And so I was sure that there would be a long reflection on these themes, but I haven't seen that many stories. And I still feel that Europeans are not properly portrayed in British culture, in theatre or film. So I think there is a conversation to be had about that, because there is a belief that we are somehow different because we come from continental Europe, and so there is a distance, but there is no real portrayal of Europeans. Sorry, my baby is going mental, so I'm going to mute myself. I'll be right back. So sorry.
Okay, so maybe moving to the next question, and maybe you can also address, the people who haven't spoken now can address this point, is when you started making your own film, what kind of audience did you have in mind? And is it actually the audience that ended up enjoying the film, and who would you like your film to reach?
Let me add a little bit into the previous question about making a film about migration. I think for me, as a person who is not from UK and left country 3 years ago and came and migrated to the UK, I always was interested into the migration life, the exilic life, living in exile, the difference between my home culture and the culture of the new place I'm going to rejoin. These typical questions always make me interested to go and challenge and find out and research on, okay, what people are facing, how they are trying to co-opt themselves with a new life, new culture, how they are trying to explain things to their children who they have no idea about this movement. So for me, the one of the big reasons making The Postman was because he was a very, very best friend of me, and I was in his life every single day, and we've been together for almost 10 years, and I was watching him all the time, with all the happiness, with all the sadness he was facing of this movement, and same, he was watching me in the same way. So I think making films about refugees is very good to show to the world that how we are facing, how we are living, what condition are we in a new place. And we haven't seen much. It's a few films about migration, but I think we still need to make more and more. We still need to tell everyone what's going on. For example, we don't see much films about Syria. So many people are refugee in their own home. I'm refugee in somewhere else, but I'm exiled in another country. They are exiled in their own country. I'm not going to take it into the politics way, but all I'm trying to say is making film about refugees is always good, and I hope we see more and more all the time.
Yeah. David, do you have anything you would like to add?
To either question.
Yeah. Stop me if I'm talking too much. I probably have too much to add. I realize I also didn't say the name of the film, which is part of your festival now. It's called Revenir, To Return. And if I can talk about sort of, I need to really talk about two films together, The Land Between and Revenir, because they have more than just a connection. And the reason that I made Revenir in the way that I did was as a direct result of The Land Between. So The Land Between was a film that I made. I'm from Australia. I went to Morocco. I filmed other people, and I then shared their story. And then I was lucky enough to be able to travel a lot with the film. And, you know, there was a lot of, I guess, in some ways, rigorous debate about the appropriateness of, you know, an outsider telling these sorts of stories. And I was really challenging my own sense of, well, to be honest, I told myself after that film that I was not going to make another film about migration, because I had told the story that I wanted to tell in a way, or to the best of my ability. And then it was actually Kumut who suggested to me, or he asked me, how about we make a film together? So he had this dream in his mind for years before meeting me that he wanted to do this. And he was actually also writing a book about his story. So when we met, he saw, you know, I don't know a better word to use other than, we didn't use each other, but without him, and without him, I couldn't make this film, and without me, he couldn't make this film. So it was a, and that, I guess that's why I'm apologizing that he's not here now, because even in the screenings and in everything, I'm making such a point that it's a collaboration, and we've traveled a lot together with the film, and generally I give him the microphone and I have nothing to add really, because, you know, who am I to answer questions of what life is like as a refugee? I haven't lived this ability, this reality. As to why I decided in the first place, I think what's very interesting is I'm also I'm an Italian Australian. So it's interesting that we all have this sort of migrant background in our own life. And though I didn't realize at the time that's why I wanted to make these films, I now understand that migrant story is a very deep part of my own family history. So many stories that I was hearing today were echoed in my past. Whenever our family get together, we talk about the struggles from generations before, and that was from an Italian to Australian migration. And now the specifics have changed, but so many of the stories are so very similar. So perhaps that was a subconscious reason of why I wanted to tell these sorts of stories. As far as audience, I probably have a different answer. I don't think about an audience. I try to make as ethically strong, authentic, and honest film. And I believe that it's better to be true to that and to get a smaller audience than to mold a story for a specific audience and be maybe making decisions based on that. So I generally don't make decisions based on an audience, but in saying that, it was very strong for both of us that the film was seen not just in Europe and also on the African continent. So that was a very specific, but we didn't make the film for that. But as far as screenings, we then focused on an audience once the film was made.
I think it's interesting with audience as well, because, you know, I think definitely when you want to tell sort of a story about like a migrant, there's such a sort of negative sort of rhetoric going on about migrants that there can be a tendency to almost look into the audience and make the migrant a good immigrant and, you know, tell like a good migrant story, because there's always a danger that if you tell a story about crime, then that's going to be sort of the narrative and that's going to be the norm. And, you know, we see so much negative portrayals in the news and the media that I guess as storytellers, we want to tell, you know, rounded stories. But I think the amazing thing about I guess about living today is the online sphere and how sometimes when you do make something, it can be from a very pure place where you're just getting it off your chest, and then it's sort of for the internet to decide, and, you know, for everyone else to decide. You know, you don't have control of who watches something. But I think for us, you know, we made the film 2 years ago, and it's had a really amazing response online. It's been really humbling. And I think one thing that it's kind of shown us is just that kind of what Cecilia was saying before about how she hasn't really seen many stories about Europeans in London, for example, on film. And I think it's the same, I guess, with us. There's not many stories about Afghans on screen. And I think with the online response, there's been a lot of views and a lot of comments. And I think one thing that it shows is that there's a market for these type of stories. You know, people are hungry for these type of stories. And so it definitely kind of encourages you to kind of, you know, definitely want to tell more of these type of stories, because, you know, there's like a market for it. And if you don't tell them, then who will, you know?
I think it's also very interesting in my experience of this distinction possibly between filmmaker, documentary filmmaker, which is what I make, and activist. And I don't know if that's a discussion that people would like to, but, you know, when you think about audio, you know, a lot of activist films are telling one side of a story, and like everything, these are terribly nuanced and complicated and complex issues and stories. And I think that that's one of the reasons why I don't necessarily focus so much on an audience. I just try to make, you know, like you said, real, and well, I agree that online potential is, you know, is amazing. All my films are online, and you don't know who may discover your film.
Just as a quick aside, how would you class yourself in that, like, documentary maker, activist? Where would you think you sit on that spectrum?
Me, myself?
Yeah.
I still am not 100% sure.
Fair. Yeah.
Yeah. I mean, because you want to, as much as I say I want to project an unbiased, it's impossible. So it's still through my lens and my, where my I have existing empathy. I have an existing view, and I point the camera in that way and I edit in that way. And I would say probably that my filmmaking is my activism. So I'm not a person that is in the street and other things. I use sort of my discussions as my activism. So, but I would probably say a filmmaker, because the reality, and I don't know how the others feel, but, you know, like I've made films before this about other issues that had nothing to do with migration. And in the future, I will make films about other issues that have nothing to do with about migration as well. So, yeah, probably a filmmaker.
But maybe it's a good thing that you can't.
Yeah, sorry.
Yeah, but maybe it's a good thing that you can't kind of specifically say, you know, it's this or it's that, you know, because I guess inevitably they all kind of bleed into each other, don't they? And
they do.
I think making the film is the way we can do. For example, a journalist writes an article about migration, so that's his activities. We make a film about migration, and that is our activity. So I think, being a documentary filmmaker or any any other genre filmmaker is kind of activities, and we just showing it by the picture, I believe.
Yeah.
I mean, I guess it goes into the idea that like migration, regardless of what decisions you make along the process of filmmaking, migration is a politicized topic. And so it's kind of hard to avoid that. If you're making a film about migration, then you're engaging with politics, regardless of whether you consider yourself an artist, a documentary maker, an activist, you're still kind of taking part in this discussion. That's sort of how we view ourselves. We're trying to show truths, we're trying to show perspectives, but recognizing that even if we show a film that's an art film, it's
I think if we mix the for me, for example, when I was making the Postman, and also when I was making the other documentary of Balloon, I never thought about politics. If I wanted to bring the politics into the Postman, it could be like 2-3 hours film. I didn't really want to make a TV show. In the TV, you see so many documentaries, they go deeply into so many thoughts of issues and the problems. For me, I think as a documentary filmmaker I believe people have enough, they've been bombarding with on news and papers and everything about the politics. They don't believe it anymore. Honestly, I do not believe it anymore. So I try to get rid of the politics. I try to skip that part and show the real life of a person who is a refugee. That is more understandable. That is more pure, I should say, and an audience will really appreciate it and really accept it. If the idea you have, maybe the others are not agree with it.
Yeah, but I guess the argument is that everything you do is political. So even if you don't intend for it to be political, it is, you showing a specific thing, a specific image, and then cutting to another image that is politics in itself. But of course, Lily, as you said, like migration and immigration and refugees and asylum seekers, it's so it's so publicized and so politicized as well. But I guess on the negative sphere, really, that it does become difficult, that even if you do have a character that for example, in our film, I guess 95% of it is spoken in Dari and Farsi, which language spoken in Afghanistan, and that was very important for us. But I guess people, seeing that would think that's a political act. Why? We had some people say to us, maybe have the character speak in English, so it's a bit more commercial, and that just, that just wasn't ever a consideration for us. I think one thing that's beautiful about London is that I'm probably going to get this wrong, but over like 250 languages are spoken every day on the streets, and to even just have a story that shows just one of those one of those spheres of London was like important to us. So yeah, it's tricky, every time you do want to, because again, I think it's something you don't think about consciously, about telling a story about a migrant. You might have a migrant character in your film, and then people label it a migrant story, and you're like, well, no, it's a story about life, so why should it have to be this massive underline, in bold letters about a migrant, which unfortunately, people get put off by sometimes because they do think it's too politicized, but everything in life is political. So
I totally agree.
To add about the language, David said, I was going to say, I had the opposite experience when I was showing the Postman in the festival. I was always asked why he's not speaking in Farsi, he's Iranian, why he's speaking in English. So, you don't really know what language you put on. So I had, as you said about the Farsi language, I thought I should mention this. Very good idea.
I mean, I think that we're all talking about sort of something common, which is doing things in the most respectful and honest and authentic way. And not that I necessarily disagree, Azim, that you said we need more stories about migration. We do, but I don't think we necessarily need more stories. We need more creative ways of telling these stories. We need more, how do I say this in the right way? in the last years, it became almost, and I'm sorry for saying this, but I truly believe it, I can't say the word trendy, but a lot of people automatically saw that you could make a film about migration and there was a market or a niche for it. And that I saw became a lot of the impetus for making these sorts of films. And I don't think we need a lot of quality films. We need a lot of respectful and honest films and creative, because also audiences' eyes glaze over, to be perfectly honest. Another film about migration, we know what we're going to hear, we know what we're going to get. And so I think our job is to capture
this. Like, as for our festival, we accept online submissions for films. And there has been an increase in the number of films that we received in the past 4 years. But there are always tropes in the films that we receive, and inevitably a very high number of the films we receive are about people on boats that are trying to cross the Mediterranean and to get to this side of Europe, right? And those are stories that are important to tell, but there is a real risk that people think that is the only story about migration, that's the only thing that is happening in the world. And so while it's an important thing that is happening, is not the only thing that we want to focus on. So that's why we welcome films that focus on other parts of the world or on other aspects. And increasingly we want to include comedy much more, because we also have the impression that people think that migration is a sad topic. It's not a sad topic, it's life. And so comedy is part of life. And so, like, of course, there is also sadness, but it's not the only thing that we need to be talking about. So this was my reminder that we just have 5 minutes left.
Before you stop, I need very important things to mention. This was one of the reasons, honestly, to be here. I was gonna ask for you guys, Lily and Laura, as the people who are organizing the film festival. There is something we migrant filmmakers really need, and that is support. So many stories are ready to be a film, but there is, for example, the filmmaker, the director, they don't know how to get funding, they don't know how to get support. So I was going to ask, do you have any plan in supporting the migrant filmmaker? Have you ever thought about this, or have you ever done anything in supporting?
So I guess that we are all in the same boat, because we also don't have money. We did our first, last year we did the festival.
I mean, it's not about the money. I think if you financially cannot support, we can open up the link with the other producers or with the other companies who are trying to read.
Maybe it would be interesting to. We don't know what is the best way to support a filmmaker, because we are not filmmakers and we are kind of external from this world, because we came to it from a migration/academic point of view rather than filmmaking. So maybe it would be great to hear from you what kind of support you need and what can we do as festival directors to make sure that next time we do something, we help the filmmakers as well as the audience. What do you need?
Well, I mean, for example, at the film festival, you can open up a good link between the films or filmmakers who submit their films to your festival with any other big film production companies, sending the films to them to watch them. They might be interested into the film, they might be interested to working with the director of those films submitted into your festival. So this will...
So it's a networking opportunity.
Yeah, well, it's not working, honestly, if an opportunity to be seen.
Yeah,
I'm trying to say it's
that is very interesting to hear, and definitely something that we would like to know more about. Maybe other people on this discussion have other ideas in terms of what kind of support we can offer.
Well, obviously, I mean, distribution is the, which I guess is maybe what you were talking about, pushing it further. And that did actually, I did get an email from your festival that someone was interested in my film, and you facilitated that. It didn't end up working, but that was a really, that could be expanded upon, I think, in a really, in really strong ways. I actually got a message that that our talk has been, there's no limit extension, so I don't know if we need...
Yay! Okay, so we can keep talking.
Yeah, I got a message on my screen saying there's no limit.
Yeah, same.
Okay, great.
Fantastic. Thank you, Zoom.
Yeah.
Zoom is
I think
understanding how important it is to talk about migration. So
Yeah.
we'll give you 3 minutes.
I think also just about kind of support. I think just even having your film shown to an audience is a massive thing because um, because yeah, I think, you know, living in the time of the internet, it is easy to kind of make something and just say, you know what, I'm just going to release it on YouTube or, you know, Vimeo, all these other, there's so many online platforms now. But I think to be in a room where you can experience something, you know, for the first time with a whole group of people is a wonderful thing too. So I think even having a festival where you can show stories about a specific subject and, you know, stories that don't always get told, is so important. I mean, because that I think, and again, you know, not, you know, obviously we're all indoors right now, so that's difficult to kind of experience, you know, that human connection. But I think that's what's so important about stories, is that, you know, whole groups of people come together and view something they're not necessarily familiar with, and learn something new and go on a journey, because that's what we really want to do. I don't think any of us want to be didactic in our approach and say, you know, this is what's going on, this is what we want to do, and or maybe sometimes, you know, that is sort of the narrative that we do want to go to, because we're so sick and tired of sort of the negative portrayals, you know, in the news and, you know, mainstream media, that sometimes you do want to kind of put on the activist hat and get the megaphone out and say, you know, all certain people aren't boogeymen, you know, these people aren't bad, you know, you just haven't seen these portrayals before. But no, I think just going back to the whole thing about festivals, I mean, it's I think now more than ever, it's kind of showing how important those collective spaces are. You know, theaters and cinemas, you know, it's so yeah, it's kind of what makes us human, you know, those kind of interactions.
Can I share a small experience that maybe you may find interesting? Kumut and I, we traveled a lot. We went to many dozens of screenings. And one thing that we did, which was very special, was we had 1 month, and we spent 1 month touring in Germany and Switzerland. And it was a combination of a German film festival, the African Film Festival of Cologne, who organized and assisted us, and also ourselves. And basically, I think we showed the film like 23 times in, well, no, maybe more than 30, but 23 days in 30 days. And it wasn't just at festivals, it was mainly at schools, actually. Like we had rooms of like 400 or 500 school children. And, you know, they're not financial, it's nothing to do with money, it's nothing to do with festivals, it's nothing to do with, but, you know, like seeing film as a resource, as an educational resource, or a starting point for a discussion, or, you know, to have children to have workshops with children to teach them how to make films about, you know what I mean? Like, to not just to have the standard festival, for example, but to initiate like a spark that may resonate beyond the film and maybe inspire others to continue, or to even start this sort of topic. And, you know, I actually see a film by itself is great, but a film with an audience, with a Q&A, the film actually for me becomes just a door opening, and the most interesting part is the half an hour or 1 hour discussion, when you really can engage and you can criticize and you can ask and you can really share. And I think people really appreciate that, having the filmmaker, and more importantly, having even the protagonist at a screening. It's something, it becomes an event. It doesn't become a film, it becomes a real engagement of humans. And I truly believe that it can have, the impact can be multiple times stronger when filmmakers and protagonists are there for a discussion.
If I may add, sorry about running away, but to your credit, Lily and Laura, when I wasn't there at the screening when Article 50 was screened, but Paul, the writer, was, and he said that what he loved about your festival was that there was an actual audience, which wasn't just made of friends or acquaintances or even industry people, but there were people, a very varied audience. Because in my experience, often, especially with short films, it's hard to reach a broader audience, especially in themes of migration, people who might not have a clue about what it means to be a migrant, any type of migrant, and who find themselves in a room and actually discover a story about someone who's very different from them and sympathize with their journey. So I don't know how you did it, but I think that's something that you should carry on doing, because it was obviously very effective. And I think it's very important to get these stories to audiences that aren't already acquainted with migrant stories, or who, you know, to have a conversation with someone who's different from the migrant stories that are being told, I think is I find quite important.
Every year we spend a fair amount of time thinking about what are the intersections of that we want to touch upon, because migration in itself opens the door to talk about the intersection of migration with so many other issues, right? And that this is a way that we have found help us staying relevant and making sure that people who are not just get into our door. So for example, in the past edition of the festival, we realized that one of the biggest things we had to talk about was climate emergency. Mm-hmm. And so we made sure that for our launch event, we had a film that was sitting at the intersection of what happens when climate emergency pushes people to move from their livelihoods. Mm-hmm. And in this way, we get an audience, as you say, in the room that isn't necessarily perhaps just interested into migration. Maybe they come for the climate emergency side, but we engage them then in a discussion about this. And and that's also another reason why it's so important to have stories that are not just about the usual story about migration, because people will disengage from these stories very quickly, and it's going to be difficult to maintain the attention up.
And I was going to say, and even beyond that, these stories that tell the same tropes just reinforce the existing biases, concepts that people already have about migration. And the entire point of our festival is to expand what it is that people think migration is, its relevance in your life, what it impacts, who is a migrant, what the migration experience is. So
if I could also add, so like David, before, you're talking about how I guess we do have to become more creative in how we do tell these stories, because like you said, there does become a saturation, it does become more, like kind of like flavor of the topic. It'll be very easy to get funding if you make a story about this and if you make a story about that, and it's and it's quite sad actually, because on one hand, you're not almost allowed to tell a story that you want to tell because maybe it's been done a few times and maybe it hasn't been done very well, which means that when people hear the synopsis of your film, they're just thinking, no, I don't want to watch that, regardless if they haven't even seen a single frame. But yeah, I think maybe we do almost need to find. I think it just kind of goes back to being more specific, because I think the more specific you are, the more universal you become. And I think all the films that all of us are representing right here are very, very different. Yet, I guess if there was something to kind of link them together, it's about people who are migrants, and that's kind of and that's quite amazing, because it just shows how massive it is. It's not, no migrant story is a monolith. Everything is unique, and no story is similar. So I think it's so important that we do keep telling stories, and I think stories that come from a sincere place. I think at the end of the day, if you tell a story that's from with like sincerity, I think audiences can kind of pick that up, and they can kind of feel that authenticity as well. And hopefully the other stories that are just made just to grab the headlines, will kind of fade away, because
so maybe Azim, moving from what you were saying, and this is a question for all of you, what is the recommendation that you will give to filmmakers that want to make films about migration? So what is a starting point? What are the considerations that we need to keep in mind when we approach this subject? And also in terms of representation, how do we make sure that we're not doing something that might be offensive for some people?
I think the best way of making a documentary is, we all as a filmmaker, we don't tell anything. If we've got a character in that documentary, we've got a person and we are going to document his life, or we've got a story, we should wait and give space to the story to tell everything itself. So nowadays, most of the documentary, the filmmaker, the director, or the producer are trying to put their legs into the film to tell something specific that they are looking for. But that is not documentary. I don't see that as a documentary. Documentary is, if I'm making a film about someone, I should just be the camera and leave everything with the story, with the person I'm documenting his life, and leave it to go. I think audience will accept it more that way than I cut it down, or I don't really believe if I'm interviewing someone, I have to cut down and use the parts that I really want to be, or I think, okay, if he says this sentence in this film, it's gonna be very good. People are gonna go and watch just because of this. I don't think so. I think the best way for documentary making now is firstly, we have plenty of stories. We don't need a story. We need a unique way to tell them. First of all, to don't repeat. Now everyone is repeating. We see same things and they are all repeating. I think we have plenty of story about migration life. What we need to find a unique way to tell it. And the other option, the other point is just leave it to the story. Let the story talk to us. Let the story to go ahead and I personally want to be just the camera. I want to be, as a filmmaker, as a director of the film, I really want to be one of the audience. I just want to imagine myself as a person who's sitting down and watching it. This is my belief.
I would tell, or I do tell people, not to not make a film, but to really, you must think deeply about it. You must understand the responsibility, and the responsibility does not end when the film is made. You have a responsibility in once you enter people's lives, and these particular stories. Sorry, I haven't yet watched your film, so I can't comment on specific issues. But a lot of the time, these stories are of people in vulnerable situations. You are entering into the life of a real human. They're not a character on a screen. They're a woman, or they're a man, or they're a father, or they're a child. They are real people, and they have trusted you into their life. And my belief is that the film is never more important than the human relationship. And most of I only film probably 1% of the time when I'm in a situation, to be honest. And I only film when I have to. And to be brutally honest, I hate filming people in very difficult situations, because it's the last thing that people generally want in that situation. So you have to know that when you go in, you have a huge responsibility. This responsibility doesn't take weeks or months, but it's years. And I believe you must remain in contact very deeply with these people whose lives, because in the end, you're just a filmmaker. It's not your story. It's somebody else's story. So you have, and maybe, I don't know if we could touch on this topic, because for me, it's extremely interesting about the pros and cons, or the strengths and weaknesses of documentary as opposed to the drama, let's say, because I'm becoming increasingly of the opinion that documentary is becoming more and more difficult, if not impossible, to really tell true stories, because so many people are coming now with cameras and offering money and offering this, and don't have ethics and don't have high levels of responsibility. And I'm experiencing it in my own struggles of people immediately put their hand out and give me money. And that's because people that have come before have come for 1 day or 1 hour and paid for a journalistic clip, which is the opposite of truth and reality. So I believe that you must have a responsibility. You need to have time, you need to have integrity, and you need to know that you are signing up for a long-term project and experience, and not see it as a negative. I hope that these relationships I'm forming, which the first film from 7 years ago, I'm still deeply engaged in the life of the protagonists now, and will be hopefully for the rest of my life. And that's what I think I would tell people.
Very interesting, definitely.
If I may add, because our short was fiction, and our experience was in fiction rather than documentary, I would say that even if it's a made-up story, it would have to be very personal. And by that, I don't mean that it has to be your story or the story of your grandma or whoever, but it needs to be important for you to, on a personal level, to share that story. And I'm not because I love to watch comedy. I'm a big fan of comedy when done well, because I think it's very powerful, and it can, my dad used to say that laughter is a way to exercise pain, and I really believe that. I think there's so much truth in comedy, and I think I'd love to see more stories of migration told through that lens. And that doesn't mean let's put a joke in there and have people laughter. It means try and show a character's journey through that lens, because there's so many opportunities for different layers as well, I personally find.
I totally agree with you, Cecilia, on this. And please,
Yeah.
comedians out there, make stories about migration and send them to our festival. We want to show them.
Mm-hmm.
And I think also to do with this humor, I'm relatively new in filmmaking. I've been filmmaking for less than 10 years. And when I look back at 10 years ago and now, I have a very different view about decisions in editing and so forth. And, I hope as I mature as a human and as a filmmaker, I see beyond like originally the films I wanted to make showed suffering, showed difficulty, but when you are in this situation, and weirdly, I haven't worked out why it is, but sometimes it's the times where people are in the most suffering and vulnerable situations, the more humor and sport and play comes out. And it depends, as a filmmaker, you can choose what you show. You can come with your preconceived story and idea that you want to show suffering, but people in difficult situations generally aren't talking about that at all, or they're trying not to. They're trying to live like all of us. And I hope that that's what stories focus on in the future, which is sort of just showing the reality of a situation, which is not just a one-dimensional story of suffering, let's say. And because humanity is to really touch an audience, which is a film is useless unless people see it. It doesn't change anything just because you press record. So you must touch other humans. And the only way, I believe, to touch other humans is to show humanity in your story, in your protagonists, and show what unites us rather than that divides us, the differences, let's say.
Brilliant.
Yeah.
Vahid, do you have anything you would like to add? Sorry, not Vahid, Azim.
Oh, so about kind of, yeah, I think, again, kind of touching on what everyone else was saying, just, again, my short was fiction, so I can't speak from like a documentary point of view, but I think what I will say is that, whenever you want to kind of tell a story, especially, direct something or make something, it takes time. And so you want to be with something, a subject matter that you're passionate about, and something that you won't get bored of 3 months down the line, 6 months down the line, a year down the line, 2 years down the line, and you want to still be able to talk about it a few years later. So I think, I think for me, obviously, like, this film was personal, so that helps. But I think if you are going to tell another story, because humans, a lot of us are empathetic, and so we do want to tell, different types of stories. And sometimes I guess it's scary if you're someone who's not a migrant yourself and you think, I want to tell this story, but I don't know how to. What I would say is, do your research. And yeah, I mean, there's no excuse. There's people you can seek out, and you can do your research. You can meet people, and see whether or not you're being sensitive or being oversensitive and things like that. But I think for a lot of us, it's about kind of telling stories that we want to tell. And I think sometimes when there's things you want to get off your chest, that in many ways it kind of breaks the barrier of, oh, am I representing? Because you can never represent. One story you tell about anyone, about one migrant, is never going to represent the whole migrant experience. It's never going to represent the whole Afghan experience or the whole African experience, and you're just not going to be able to do that. And so you're always going to have people who are going to say, oh man, you didn't like, I liked that bit, but I didn't like that bit, because a lot of people don't do that. And you think, well, no, you don't do that. You don't like that, but other people identify with that bit. So I think it's about being brave as well in your storytelling, because every every decision or action you make is going to be specific to your story. So be brave in your storytelling. Come at it from a sincere point of view, and just know that you're not going to please everyone. But I think if you please yourself, then that's kind of the main thing, and you hope then audiences see that. And I guess again, the amazing thing about kind of the times we live in is sometimes when you tell a story, not everyone's always going to engage in it, and not everyone's always going to see it. They might see it at a festival, they might get a few views on YouTube or whatever, and then that will be it. But I think the amazing thing about kind of the online space is that it will live, and people will seek it out, hopefully, in time. And I think that's the thing about these stories as well, is that we can't expect to have people view it and immediately get this massive response. It takes time sometimes. So I guess it's about being patient and kind of living with it.
Yeah.
Oh,
So
oh yeah.
Any
Sorry.
any new projects are coming with any of you filmmakers? Anything you're working on now?
Are you?
This Zoom is not easy, is it?
Yeah.
While Lily was trying to find a question, I just asked, are you at the moment making any films? Are you involved in any project at the moment?
How about yourself? Are you doing anything?
I've got 2 documentaries. One is a feature documentary from my university project, and it's about filmmakers in exile. So I will investigate the life of mostly Iranian filmmakers who are living outside of Iran, and they're trying to make film. So how the exile is affecting them, the creativity, what's the positive and negative point of being in exile. And also I'm writing for the Postman documentary. This might be interesting for Lily and Laura. I'm writing the feature fiction of his life. So we decided to make a feature film of this man, and we are in the process of writing this story.
Can I ask to yourself or anybody who would like to answer, what's your view on the sort of the outsider making a film about somebody, or the insider making a film, or a project that's something that's about their life or their culture or their experience, for example?
that's the $1 million question.
Yeah.
Who wants to have a go with an answer?
Well, if I'm not sure if I did get the question right or not, but if to bring the culture, if was that your question, to how to bring the culture into the film, or?
No, it's more so. For example, I'm a male. I'm a white Australian male. I can tell you intimately what it's like to be a white Australian male, but I can't tell you what it's like to be a black woman.
Yeah.
I can make a film. So this, obviously, as an outsider or as an insider, you have different perspectives on the protagonists and the story, and just wondering what people think about the strengths and weaknesses about both ways, telling stories as an outsider and as opposed to an insider.
I'll just go and be controversial. I might be naive, but I think for me the best way is if those two sides meet somewhere and can have a dialogue. So, I'm a big believer of great storytelling is great storytelling. So if you were to tell the story as a white Australian male of a black African woman, I don't know, but I would think that if you were able to be respectful of each other and of your journeys, and actually your differences inform the story, I would be very, very interested to see it. And I think personally, as a woman, now there's a lot of feminist, I'm a woman, so nobody understands my story. Yes, probably nobody understands what it means to be, but there can be a dialogue, because otherwise what's the point? We're all just going to tell stories about what we know, who we are. And I think what's interesting is the intersection of those two very different experiences and how they talk to each other, if that makes any sense.
Yeah. I think I think definitely, because I think if you were to ask all of us, what are your favorite books and films, it'd be so varied. The protagonists would be so varied, and the stories would be so varied, and that's because I guess the writer or the storyteller from the very beginning is writing a story about someone else. Of course. I mean, for example, in my short Outcome of Love, the lead is female, and that was just kind of, I guess, originally writing, because it's kind of like a two-hander between Haroon and Samira, and I guess on the surface people might think, okay, it's easy to write the guy, but in many ways, it was easy to write the female, because we didn't come at it from a point of view of, oh, because it's female it has to be something different. It was never that. But of course it's about understanding and knowing that there are, of course, very differences and nuances that you won't always get, which is why you do the research, and you talk to various people, you talk to the actress, and does that feel real, all that sort of stuff. But I think some of the best things, I think as humans and as storytellers, we're interested in other stories, and I think you should never be afraid of that. And I think of course, I think in like today's day and age, it is getting tricky, because I think if you don't get it right sometimes, and by that I mean a small group of people who can be quite vitriolic on the internet, saying, why are you telling this story? You didn't get it right. Don't do that. It can put people off from telling stories about the other. But I think while there are kind of like a dearth of stories about various ethnic minorities, which is why more and more people from that background are telling those stories now, that shouldn't stop other people from telling those stories as well. I think it is tricky, but I think you just have to do some of the things I was saying before. You have to be brave. If you have a good story that you want to tell, go for it. Do your research, meet as many people as you can from that background, and don't be afraid to ask questions. I think sometimes people are afraid to kind of they're afraid of offending sometimes, aren't they? That they don't want to ask a question about something. But I think if you come from kind of a pure humanitarian way, and you just ask the question because you don't know the answer, then people know that, and hopefully that will reflect in the story you're telling as well. I mean, how do you feel, David, about like going forward? I mean, are there stories that are at like the back of your mind where you're like, I don't know if I want to tell that, or having this experience of telling stories about the other, has it given you more confidence about telling these stories?
Very interesting. So, as I said, the main reason I made Revenir, and so to explain just very quickly, with Revenir, what happened, I spent about 3 months in France with Kumut before the film, and we did a crowdfunding, and it was fully funded with crowdfunding and totally independent, and it was just the two of us. There was nobody else involved. So we had total freedom. So I used that time to teach him the basics of filmmaking, in the sense of, record and stop, nothing extreme, but just to ensure that, because I didn't go with him, so he then took the whole journey by himself. So there was no backup. There was no technical or filmmaking backup. I wasn't there. And so we were in contact every single day via WhatsApp and so forth. But ultimately, I had to renege my power, in the sense of, which I didn't find that easy to do, and not power, but once my training, in a sense, was done and Kumut was on the road, of course he sent the footage and I could give him feedback as he was going, but I relinquished my, I'm sorry, not power, control. I relinquished my control. And so the footage that I started to receive back was nothing at all that I expected to receive back. We spoke for months about what the filmmaking would be, and I had an idea about the footage, but Kumut had his story that he wanted to tell. And so I was challenged from the outset, because I received the rough cuts, let's say, and I then had to, it really pushed me creatively in not telling the story that I wanted to tell, but I became an editor of Kumut's footage. And there was a very interesting process. And what was even more interesting was, after making this film in this way, in this collaboration, which I'm extremely proud of, I'm sort of in a way prouder of the collaboration than the film, in a sense. Like the film is a very interesting film, but I'm more proud that we did it in this way. And Kumut is so proud that his story is now on film. That is more important to me than awards or huge audiences. And we were talking about success before we made the film. And I asked Kumut, what is your definition of, how can we define that this is a successful film? And he just said, if we can make this film, that is the success. Like if we can pull it through, if it can come together. So in a way, it sort of made me view things a little bit differently. But in answering your direct question, I'm now much more comfortable in telling stories of the other after doing this collaboration in this way. Not because it wasn't a good experience, it was a fantastic experience, but I just know that there are different ways to tell stories. And if I tell it as an outsider, I will tell it through a different lens. I'm not saying it's more interesting or less interesting, but it's just a different perspective. And I think we need both insider perspectives and outsider, because when you're an insider, the things that are your normal occurrences, you would not even think to film because you don't think they're interesting, or you don't think an audience would find them interesting. Or, you know, if you eat the same, Kumut eats the same food every day, and for him it's just, but for me, the process of an African making food is extremely interesting, and an audience is really engaged in that. And so I think that there can be very much strengths also as an outsider, but also, I don't know if people are prepared for it. I was considering making a film called Black is Beautiful and looking at skin whitening. And I'm a white person. And I started to tell this idea to people about, what do you think about this? Mainly filmmakers. And the interesting thing was that most white filmmakers told me, oh, you can't make that film, you're an outsider, and what would you know? And every African I told said, this is fantastic, I'll help you to make this film. So in a way, we need to really be open and creative. And if it comes from the right place with integrity and honesty and sincerity, I think that we can make both insider, outsider, and, as you say, sort of this collaborative approach. Authenticity is, for me, higher than anything.
And it's great that you guys had a conversation about this, because like, who is allowed to tell what story is an issue that we discuss very often, also in the process of choosing films or choosing filmmakers that we want to feature. Like, this is something that we really spend a lot of time discussing. And so it's great to hear all your perspectives. And also, like, it's interesting to see that from everybody's perspective, at the end of the day, there is always somebody who is going to be unhappy with the choice you make. So there is going to be somebody who is happy with the films you're making, and there's going to be somebody who is complaining. So maybe let's try to focus on the positive while keep on taking
we're not here to please everyone.
Yeah.
But I think we also have our body of work to support us. So I've personally seen a big change in the way people would view me making these sorts of films, because now I can show potential protagonists, show films that I've made, show the way that I've made them, show the screenings, show that I'm still in contact with people that have been in vulnerable and suffering positions. But when I first went to make my first film about this issue, I didn't have anything on the board, let's say, to show people that to trust you. It's about trust. And I think the more you have to trust yourself at the very start that you're doing things the right way, and then your body of work hopefully supports you in being able to present it to people, whether that be, as I say, protagonists or even possibly producers or, financiers or something, that you can deliver a quality project in the most respectful way.
Yes, I'm conscious that we went over 1 hour now. Yeah. So maybe we should wrap up. What do you think?
Yeah.
Yeah, can I say thank you for the invitation to be involved in this, and to the London Migration Festival. Yeah, thanks for your support, and I hope that we can continue this sort of relationship and these sorts of, you know, I think that also a film exists and it's all these other things. So, for example, this discussion we're having, hopefully we can post that, and then that can engage people. And when you go to a festival, maybe there's an interview with a newspaper where your film may only be seen by 20 people, but then 200,000 people read about your film in the press the next day or something. So I think that we just need to like keep the faith and stick together and support each other in on this journey. So good luck to you all, and thank you for your support.
Mirroring what you just said, like, thank you so much to all of you who gave us your films. And we kept the online platform on for about 10 days now, and more than 16,000 people have come on it. So hopefully this will make more people engage with your films in the future as well.
Great. And for the audience that's watching this, what's the website where they can go to watch the films?
So it's on our website, which is migrationcollective.com, and then go on the online program.
And these conversations are great as well, aside from me running away but missing half of it. But I think it's great to talk about migration and migration stories this way. So if you can do more, you know, that's great.
Yeah, thank you for the continued support, and you know, just lovely talking to all of you guys, and you know, hopefully we can do this in person in the not too distant future.
Yeah.
Same as everyone. Many thanks, Lily, Laura, thanks a lot. It's almost, I think, 3 years we are still in touch, and that is so, it's really, honestly so good, and I hope we can continue this more and more years. It's very good to see today also Azim, David, and also Cecilia, if I'm spelling it right. It's honestly so good, and it's always good to know more filmmakers, always good to talk more about films, to share the ideas, help each other. It's if we could keep this doing it more and more, it would be very, very helpful, honestly. Thanks a lot for it.
Thank you.
Sweet. Well, thank you so much. Yeah. I
Thanks,
hope you
bye-bye, everyone.
have a good afternoon, a good, enjoy the evening, afternoon, sun, everything.
From inside, yeah.
Yeah.
Let's stay at home, by the way.
Yeah.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye.
Thank you guys.
Bye-bye.
Take care.
Bye.
Bye.
Bye-bye.